Welcome everybody to yet another edition of Drunk Agile. With me as always is the Yogi Bear of Agile.
Prateek Singh.
And with him, the star of the show, never in the same place twice. She's like lightning. Nisha, hey Nisha, she perked up. She's like, what?
Hey, talking to me?
Yeah. And my name is Daniel Vacanti. So Prateek, what are you drinking? Let's start us off. What are you drinking?
Yeah, I am back to the barrel bourbon. Probably one of my top, currently
one of my top 100 whiskeys.
Top, I know. I started counting, and I'm like, oh God.
I ran out of fingers.
Oh. So yeah, barrel bourbon. We've done this before on the podcast. 56.11%. Yeah, 2 decimal places.
Ah, yes. We'll come back to later. We'll come back to decimal points in a little bit.
So that's what I have today.
All right, I'm back. I'm back to the EC small batch. I think I said before that I can really only drink this in old fashioned, so I'm lazy. I was just really lazy tonight, so I am drinking it neat. It's not terrible.
It's inoffensive. It's not offensive. It's not deep neat, but it's inoffensive.
Given where we are with everything and my stocks being what they are, I'm actually surprised my stocks have held up the way that they have, but I guess I've been kind of rationing. But anyway, cheers everybody. Welcome to the show. Tonight, the show you've been waiting for, maybe the show you haven't been waiting for, is going to be all about cumulative flow diagrams, or CFDs.
CFDs.
And we were just talking before. If anybody knows the two curmudgeons on the Muppets, we had to look it up. We couldn't remember their names, but it's Statler and Waldorf. So in the comments, I want everyone to leave your comments. So which one of us is Statler and which one of us is Waldorf. But just think of this as an extended Muppets show tonight.
Tonight, I think that's pretty much.
We have a lot to complain about tonight. So Prateek, I don't know. Start us off. Cumulative flow diagrams, CFDs. What are they? And we'll get into why we should care, why we shouldn't care, maybe a little bit later. What are they? What are they?
Cumulative flow diagrams.
Hey, Yogi Bear, I got to hear this.
So they show how, as work flows through your system, the cumulative count of issues as the work flows through your system. So yeah, it shows the flow of the work flowing through your system and the cumulative count of the issues.
Okay.
I tried to over Yogi Bear that.
That was absolutely not clear at all. But hopefully most of you are. Well, I'm guessing most of you are familiar with cumulative flow diagrams. My further guess is most of you are familiar with cumulative flow diagrams in the way that they've been explained incorrectly. So hopefully we can correct or not correct a lot of those myths tonight. Oh, did you think of something else?
Yeah, I did. And this might be horribly wrong, but might also be right because I just came up with this. For those of you who are uninitiated with flow metrics and have been in the Scrum world for a while, it's if you did a burn down chart of story counts, let's say it is just the opposite of the burn down chart is the burn up chart and if you just did that of story counts, that would be the bottom line of the cumulative flow diagram. Now, if you did that for every state in your process, the burn up chart of story counts for every state in your process, that would eventually lead you to your cumulative flow diagram.
And we're actually going to talk about how thinking about cumulative flow diagrams in terms of counts is really not the right way to think about them. I mean, it's a decent enough, and actually it's not really a decent enough starting point, but I know that's how most people think about them, is in terms of counts of number of them. But that's believe it or not, that is the absolute wrong way to think about cumulative flow diagrams. And maybe we should start off with that. But just very quickly, I like to say this, it was the best of charts. It was the worst of charts. Before we get into this, CFDs are by far and away my most favoritist chart of them all. I just love cumulative flow diagrams. If for no other reason, it's the only chart. I think I said this in a previous episode. It's the only chart that you can really see the interplay of all the important metrics of flow just, all on one chart. So they're extremely important. But the reason I don't like them is because, as I said before, they're explained terribly, so nobody really understands them. And there are much more useful charts that, if you get those charts right, aging, scatter plot, etc., you may never ever need to look at a cumulative flow diagram. So let's talk about counts, shall we? So we brought visual aids. Prateek, do you mind bringing up the?
Sure, let's do that.
If you can share.
This is straight out of Jira.
Yeah. So we're gonna go to Jira. This is one way to know whether a tool that you're using has built their cumulative flow diagram right here. Right. So you can see here's a CFD, with a bunch of states defined. Now, what we're going to have Prateek go in and do is to disable that bottom state. So that bottom big blue state is done. So he's going to go in and he's going to disable done. I'm going to click apply, and you'll see what happens to the cumulative flow diagram. And there you have it. You see how it's not cumulative anymore, right? It has essentially just turned into a WIP status chart.
I do want to do. Sorry, I just want for everyone watching, when Dan says it's not cumulative anymore, he means that all the states don't move in the flat or upward direction anymore.
If you zoom, it's dipping. Yeah, you know all about that. If you zoom out, you can kind of see that. You see, everybody can see, hopefully, or maybe it won't let you zoom out.
Whenever it refreshes.
Wow, yet another reason not to.
Yeah.
So there
I zoomed into another area.
You see how it keeps going up and down and up and down and up and down, and all the states keep kind of going up and down and up and down. So this is one way to know that the tool that you're using, the cumulative flow diagram, hasn't been built properly, because it's obviously not built in a cumulative fashion. I'm going to steal screen sharing from you, by the way. Yes. So of course we're going to show Actionable Agile here, but with Actionable Agile, one way you can see as we turn off whatever state we turn off, you see the shape of that cumulative flow diagram is preserved, because it is built the way that CFDs are supposed to be built, in a cumulative fashion. Now, it's probably beyond the scope of this episode to talk about really how that cumulative fashion should be done, but just know, and I think we've mentioned this several times before, the way that you build cumulative flow diagrams, it's not off of counts of items in columns, it's off of the date that they entered a particular column. That's how you're supposed to build a cumulative flow diagram. In fact, I probably should have gone and looked it up. There's an article I found back in the 60s. I want to say it was the late 60s. And it was the earliest example that I ever saw of a CFD. And they didn't call it a CFD back then. I'm not actually sure where CFD came from, the name CFD came from. But back then they called it an arrivals departures diagram, because that's the real way to think about the cumulative flow diagram, is that each line on this chart represents, believe it or not, it represents an arrival into that state. Most people think about the cumulative flow diagrams in terms of departures, but you really, these lines are calculated as arrivals into a particular state. So this bottom line, done, you can think of that's the arrival into done. It's not actually something leaving the process. It's actually something arriving to done. I'm blabbing. Do you want to jump in and?
Nope. Keep blabbing.
Say anything. So the two number one ways, because of course there can be two number ones.
1A.
Yeah. All highest priority. The best ways to know that you're looking at a cumulative flow diagram that hasn't been built properly is, as Prateek just showed, if you turn one of the states off and the whole diagram collapses, it's not built right. And then secondly, if you ever see lines on a cumulative flow diagram that go down, it hasn't been built properly. And the reason we're harping on this right out of the gate is because if you don't have a cumulative flow diagram that's built properly, then you're kind of stuck. There's no analysis that you can really do on it because you have a junk chart.
Yeah, if you go back and watch any of the earlier episodes, we've always talked about this, that all analysis based on any of these metrics are the basis of that are the assumptions underneath those metrics. And this analytic, this chart, if you're not starting with the right assumptions, whatever analysis you do on it is going to be incorrect. It's probably going to be harmful rather than useful at that point.
So when you turned off the done column, by the way, Prateek, you didn't say your joke that you were supposed to say. We set you up for your joke about Jira.
I totally forgot.
Yeah. Okay. So here now I'm sending you. So
yeah. So this and that done column thing that happens on the CFD in Jira has been there for as long as I have seen a CFD in Jira. I don't know how long that has been, but 10 years or whatever it is. They've never fixed it. They've always had it wrong. Meanwhile, you can now use fractions in your story points. So not only can you find bourbon that's 56.11%, you can also have your story points be 5.11.
I mean, seriously, I mean, I hate to blast other tools because because I've built a tool and I know what it's like to build tools. But we're talking, this is $1 billion company. I think they're $1 billion company now. That's the most, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most basic things they haven't been able to get right. Some product manager somewhere said, let's do decimal story points over fixing our CFD. Somebody made that decision. By the way, this kind of ties back to our Don't Be a Dicka talk. If anybody wants to go see that. But anyway, okay.
And the Everybody Lies talk.
Yeah,
because I am sure customers have gone and asked for fractions of story points, but most of their customers, because what we were talking about earlier, haven't been taught how a CFD should properly be made, have never gone and said, hey, your CFD is all kinds of messed up. So both those, Don't Be a Dicka and Everybody Lies.
Yeah. So just go rewatch all our videos. I mean, that's probably the safest thing to do. Maybe stop watching this one and go watch those. Okay, so getting back to properly constructed CFDs, if you're collecting the dates that items enter all the columns in your process, then you can construct those arrival lines from which your cumulative flow diagram will emerge. Okay, so if we think about all those lines as arrivals, now what are some things that we can tell off of the cumulative flow diagram, and why are they important, or potentially why are they not important? Prateek, do you want to start us off?
Nisha has a lot to say about this, but
okay.
Yeah.
I can share my screen if you need the.
Sure.
Okay. Can you see?
So now that we're looking at this properly constructed CFD, there are some things that you can tell that are going on at every point of time. So Dan, if you want to hover over any particular.
Which metric are you gonna? Which one are you gonna do first, so I can turn off?
Let's do item counts.
Okay. You keep saying item count. Okay.
So.
Oops! Spilling my drink over here.
As Dan's hovering over a particular date, in this case, January 4th is where he was. Now he's on January 7th. We'll leave it there. You can now see, based on that CFD, how many items are in each of those stages. Once you've constructed it properly, now you can see that in analysis active, there were 2 items on that particular date. In analysis done, there were 6 items. We had, by that time we got to that date, gotten 158 items done. So once you construct this properly, you can then tell on a particular date what was happening on that team. That's one thing you can do. That's the vertical distance.
So, and I showed you, so we were on the 7th before. Yep. So I showed you can either do, by stages or for the whole thing, right? Both are valid pieces of analysis right there.
Mm-hmm. Which the whole thing is where, if you have not watched the Little Slaw episodes, you can go back and see how the whole thing kind of ties directly into Little Slaw.
Right. Okay. So that's work in progress on a given date. Okay. So what else? What else can we tell for January 7th?
So right now we were able to figure out work in progress. Now let's see what was the approximate average cycle time. Yes, that's a mouthful, but the approximate average cycle time on that particular day. So it looks like on,
start with the whole system first, I guess. Sorry.
yeah, it looks like on that particular day, on 1/7/2021, the entire system had an approximate average cycle time of 11 days. The reason we say approximate average cycle time is because one, it's not your exact average. That's why approximate. And two, the items that hit done on that particular day were not necessarily the same items that started where that line ends, which I think is somewhere around 12:25 or something like that. So the items that started on 12:26.
Yeah, you're
the items that started on 12:26 are not the items that not all those items ended at 107. So there's absolutely no reason that would be your average cycle time, unless that was the exact case.
And this is probably, I would say, what you're hitting on right here. And I'm glad you you didn't pull your 2 minutes and 18 seconds. I'm glad you explained that, because this is probably the most common misconception of cumulative flow diagrams. A lot of people will tell you this horizontal distance that we're measuring right here between the top line and the bottom line, they will tell you that that's an exact cycle time. Worse, they might even say it's an exact lead time, but they will say it's an exact cycle time. They maybe get partial credit, but not quite if they say it's an average cycle time. And I would say, actually, maybe now that I think about it, no, they don't get partial credit for that. Because the best we can say it's an approximate average. If you really want to know what, and this is why we recommend other charts, because if you really want to know what your cycle time is during this particular time period, the chart you have to go look at is a scatter plot, not a histogram. Not a histogram, but a scatter plot. We got to reshoot that histogram episode, by the way. So on any given date, we can see the number of items, the total number of items that are in progress. So, and by the way, you can see, just like for work in progress, we can see, the approximate average cycle time for the whole thing, or everything.
Yeah, this is a great illustration right there, because there is absolutely no way that analysis active has a 0 as its cycle time. It's just if that line exists, it probably means it took some time.
Right. Okay. So what else? So that's work in progress. That's cycle time-ish stuff. What else can we see?
Yeah. There's at least one more thing we can do. We can find out, and this ties back directly to what Dan was talking about earlier, that you build the cycle time by counting arrivals, by figuring out arrivals. So because we are figuring out arrivals and plotting them, naturally, we should be able to figure out the rate at which those arrivals are coming in. So the other thing you can find out, because we have plotted arrivals for every stage, is what's the arrival rate to each stage. And that's what's shown right there. And naturally, might not be as obvious, but the arrival rate for one stage should hopefully match the throughput for the next stage. If it doesn't, then something's getting stuck, but usually they should.
No, yeah, you got it right. So for analysis active, you can see the throughput for analysis active is the same as the arrival rate for analysis done. And the throughput for analysis done is the same as the arrival rate. So really, like I said, really the best way to think about these lines, I shouldn't say the best way, the only way to think about these lines is they are arrival rates. They're arrival rates. That's really what you're calculating on a cumulative flow diagram. If you watch the Little's Law episode, one of the reasons that's important is because you'll remember the first version of Little's Law was stated in terms of arrival rates. And that's why he would construct things like a cumulative arrivals and departures diagram to kind of demonstrate that.
And also, these are exact averages. Those rates are actual exact averages.
And this is by the way, so this is peculiar to the ActionableAgile tool, by the way.
In this case.
in this particular case, what you're seeing here are the actual calculated averages, so that we don't confuse people and trying to calculate approximate averages. These are exact averages. And you remember from the Little's Law episode, hopefully you watched that first before coming to this, take take your work in progress and divide it by your throughput, and you will almost certainly not come up with what's shown here as your cycle time. That's not a problem with Little's Law. That's not a problem with cumulative flow diagrams. That's a problem with your process. So that's what you need to understand is when those calculations don't come out, and the only way you can tell that is if you build the cumulative flow diagram right. Whenever you don't see those things come out right, then you know there's a problem. Can I keep going with that for a second, Prateek? Do you mind?
Yeah, I mean, I have a thought, but it might be completely wrong. But yeah, go on.
Okay, you can go. But this is
Okay.
one other way to see that. I mean, I don't have a good way of demonstrating it, on this tool, but another reason to look at this to say to know that this is an approximate average cycle time is one thing you could do is you could go to the scatter plot and you could calculate the average for all the items that finished on January 7th. We're not going to do that because it was 0. So maybe
January. I can do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we would go to January 8th, let's go to January 8th. What you could do is you could calculate the exact average cycle time for all the items that finished on January 8th. And
it says 12 days. Yeah.
Yeah. You almost certainly would not come up with 12 days. And by comparing those two, what is the CFD saying that our average, quote unquote, should have been on January 8th versus what it was? And by comparing those two numbers, you can get tremendous insight into what's going on in your process. And this is quantified in something that's known as flow debt. So you might have been introduced to flow debt as something else, like arrivals minus departures. It's not that. It's not that. Flow debt is comparing what your cumulative flow diagram thinks your average cycle time should be to what it actually is. And whether it's higher or lower tells you the things that you're screwing up in your process and how to fix them. If you want to deep dive on that, sorry, you have to read my book, Actual Agile Metrics for Predictability.
I'm sorry, you have to read the book too.
Yeah, I've got at least one whole chapter, if not 2 chapters on.
I think it's one. I think it's one.
Yeah. Well, but there's conservation of flow that kind of feeds.
Oh yeah, true.
Flow, but anyway, that's way too academic for this. What was your thought? I want to hear your thought. What were you going to say?
Well, it was along the flow debt line. It's like it's the more off that calculation is, whether in the positive or the negative, the more off that calculation is, the more you're violating the assumptions of Little's Law.
Yep.
You're in vehement violation of it if it's off by a factor of 10. Something's gone really wrong, or you've never even heard of Little's Law.
So I guess it's worth, since this is Drunk Agile and hopefully people aren't bored yet, it's probably worth exploring that just a little bit. I mean, think about this. Think. Let's try and do this thought experiment. I don't know if I can even say thought experiment, but let's try and do this thought experiment of if our cumulative flow diagram predicts, quote unquote, predicts that our cumulative flow diagram, or that our cycle time for January 8th should have been 12 days. But if we go to our scatter plot and we were to calculate that average, and the average actually comes out to say, let's say 5 days, think about what's really going on there. What that means is that you purposely, the team, purposely went in and prioritized or chose, or whatever words you want to use, to complete certain items over other items so that they got done quicker, and skewed your average. Your cumulative flow diagram is not going to show that, but your scatter plot will. And so you'll say, oh, the CFD thinks it should have been 12 days. The scatter plot says it's 5 days. That means that you purposely prioritize certain other items other than other, which means that those items that you worked on, you literally stole cycle time away from other items that were already in progress to make your cycle time look good. Yeah. It's really, 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 really bad. Sorry, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say you would see that happen usually when a team's dealing with expedites. They're constantly fixing blockers, expedites, bugs, and ignoring other things on their chart that are just aging. That's when they're stealing cycle time from those things that are aging to give it to those blockers.
Yep. And the reason that's bad, all of you might be thinking, well, that sounds really good. The reason that's bad is because remember, what we really care about is predictability. Sooner or later, those items that you didn't work on, then you're going to go back to work on and you're going to finish them. And if you had a run of items that finished on your scatter plot that took 5 days, now all of a sudden your items are going to be, these other items are going to be finishing and they're going to be taking like 20 days or 30 days or 40 days. You're going to be wildly unpredictable at that point. And so this is one way to be able to tell, as Prateek just said, how far are we straying from those assumptions of Little's law? Because that's really what's making our process unpredictable.
I was going to say, let's talk about some of the things that people usually do with CFDs and try to kind of glean from CFDs.
Okay, I have one. Should we? Are we done with deficiencies of cumulative flow diagrams before we get into that?
I don't think. Well, I don't think we ever will be. But go on.
there's just. I guess.
I'll pour another one while you go on.
I'm gonna need it. By the way, I loved the whole 2-drink minimum comment. That was brilliant. By the way, this is another
CFDs are a 2-drink minimum conversation.
I don't know if this is a final thing, like Prateek said. I don't know if we'll ever be done. But one of the last things to consider about cumulative flow diagrams, and this is not necessarily a deficiency. This is not necessarily the fault of CFDs. It's just how they are. Is they're always for looking backward at what has happened.
Yes.
You can't use it. You cannot. I don't care what anybody tells you. You cannot use a cumulative flow diagram to look forward at what's going to happen. That's not what CFDs are for. They're always for looking backward, which kind of relegates them to kind of the more retrospective-y role. You don't really use them for planning. You don't really use them for forecasting. You don't really even use them for real-time analysis of what's going on. But I mean, from time to time, it's probably reasonable in your retrospective to pull up a cumulative flow diagram and take a look at these things. But as Prateek and I have said till we're blue in the face, if you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing, controlling work, paying attention to aging, well, then by the time the stuff shows up in the cumulative flow diagram, you will have already fixed it. So there's really no point in looking at the cumulative flow diagram.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going earlier too, which is it's great to have CFDs for that initial analysis of, hey, what's happening with the system? We're just starting to evaluate it. Let's plot it out and find out what's happening with the system. You could do the same thing with a scatter plot too, by the way. You could do that initial analysis from a scatter plot as well. But if you have a large amount of unfinished WIP, it will show up on the CFD. So it's great for that. But for day-to-day operations and even for retrospective type conversations, I personally prefer the scatter plot over a CFD because it gives you a lot more context and a lot more pointed conversations than a CFD would.
I would say a lot more contextually relevant conversations too. Yeah. For all the reasons I think that we've already talked about in previous episodes. So I don't know if we need to go over there. All right. So what you were going to take us on a different path, weren't you?
Yeah, I was going to talk about the fact that many times you'll see people talk about, if your done line is become flat, or if you see bulges in the CFD, those all point to different things. So you can use a CFD to kind of have this diagnostic conversation around, hey, why are we seeing bulges in our CFD, or why are we seeing flat lines in our CFD? So many times people will talk about using CFDs as a retrospective tool. What do you have to say about that, Dan?
Well, I don't really have anything to say about that, but you made me think of something else that I wanted to complain about. So is it okay if I talk about that? Screw it. It is okay.
Please go ahead and complain, please. Why not? Anyway. Why stop now?
Yeah. So, Prateek was talking about the analysis, where you're looking for bulges or flat spots or whatever. A lot of people will say, and I don't know if you caught this, it's part of the instructions on the Jira chart, what they call it a CFD. It's not a CFD, but there's like, you can use cumulative flow diagrams to spot bottlenecks. So this is what I like to call the killer bees. We'll call them the killer bees, right? They're two bees that get associated with cumulative flow diagrams that should never be associated with cumulative flow diagrams. One of them is bottlenecks, and the other is backlog, right? Two B words that you should never be anywhere near a cumulative flow. So let's take bottleneck first. The problem with bottleneck is that most people conflate the term bottleneck with constraint. If anybody's familiar with the theory of constraints, they say that a system constraint is a bottleneck, and or vice versa. You know, whatever that is.
Yeah.
You cannot. So number one, you cannot spot a systemic constraint on a cumulative flow diagram. You cannot. A lot of people will tell you you can. You can't. You can make a guess, and it's potentially an educated guess, but you will never know for sure that is a constraint. The second thing is bottlenecks. The reason I don't even like the word bottleneck is because really what you're seeing on a cumulative flow diagram is variability in flow. That's why it's called a cumulative flow diagram. What you're seeing is a variability in flow. You're not necessarily seeing, any type of systemic problem. So that's number one. You cannot spot bottlenecks on a cumulative flow diagram. Do you want to say anything about that before we move on to backlogs?
Did you say you cannot? Did you say you cannot?
Yes. Take a drink every time I say you cannot and CFD in the same sentence. Were you gonna add on to that before we go into the backlog?
No. Please go on. Right. I cannot interrupt you with this.
Okay. Yeah. I was gonna make a joke. I was going to make a joke about your pink shirt. I'm not going to do that now. Yeah. So, all right. So backlog. The second thing is backlog. Remember, we started off this whole conversation by saying the lines on your cumulative flow diagrams represent arrival rates. The reason that you should not, is it physically possible? Is it theoretically possible to show backlog on a cumulative flow diagram? Absolutely it is. The reason you shouldn't is because by definition, anything that shows up in your cumulative flow diagram has arrived into your process. Prateek, do items that come into our backlog, I know this is a hot button issue for you. Items that show up in our backlog, have they arrived into our process?
They haven't. You haven't physically pulled anything in. Arriving into the process is, well, you might be working in a push system, but in an ideal system, you're pulling stuff into your process and working it through. Stuff that gets requested and someone on some website puts in a support ticket, those are not items that have arrived. It's when someone has started working on it or they've been selected to be worked on next is when they have arrived. The other part of it, which I'll just go on for a little bit here. The other part of it is you are most likely, if you care about it, going to cancel half of your backlog. You're going to go in and say, no, don't need to do that. Don't need to do that. Every 3 months, I'm going to go in and just cancel the bottom half of my backlog. I'm just going to do that. If you're canceling so many things that have arrived to your process, you are violating an assumption of Little's law, and the CFD is useless to you anyway. So if you consider that backlog is arrived to your process, no CFD in the world can help you.
It's too bad, because I was going to trigger you. I was going to say, but Prateek, it all has to get done anyway, right?
It all has to get done anyway. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So just remember the killer bees, backlog, bottleneck, they just do not exist in the CFD world. There was something else you were going to say? Wasn't there another topic you were going to? Because I was I was rambling too much.
There are definitely some things that because Dr. Little uses a CFD to prove Little's law, there are violations of Little's law that do become evident on a CFD. You will see if the top and the bottom line of the CFD are diverging, you're bringing in more things than you're getting done. If they're converging, you're getting more things done than you're bringing in. And I don't know why she is perked up, but she is really enjoying the CFD talk.
That's kind of scary, actually. Yeah.
I know. Anyway. But yeah, so certain, in a properly constructed CFD, those violations of Little's law do become more and more evident. We talked about at least one earlier where your approximate average starts diverging from your real average. Those kind of things do start becoming evident with the CFD.
Yep. So I guess, I mean, to sum up, one of the reasons that I love, and I should have some outpouring of love for cumulative flow diagrams, because one of the reasons, maybe the only reason, that I absolutely love cumulative flow diagrams is because if you deeply understand what a cumulative flow diagram is, how it should be constructed, how it should be analyzed, and what it's telling you, if you really deeply understand that stuff, then you understand flow. I mean, you just do. And it's, for me, it was the best way to get to the heart of what is important in flow and what is not important in flow, is by studying a cumulative flow diagram. So for learning purposes, for semi-academic purposes, it's a wonderful, like I said, I don't think there's a better chart out there. For day-to-day practical purposes of managing a process, you've just got so many better options that, the CFD is the absolute last chart that I would look at, rather than the first one.
So would it be fair to say, start with the CFD and understand it really well, and then don't ever look at it again?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So, with that, do you have the last word? I'll give you the last word. What?
Well, again, I guess that was it. Start with the CFD, understand it really well, understand how it's constructed, understand how to spot a bad one, understand the things it represents, and how you can better interpret Little's law assumptions from it. But then once you've understood it, it will help you understand flow, and then you can move on to scatter plots and aging work in progress charts to kind of run your day-to-day operations. And as long as you take care of those, the CFD will take care of itself.
So we look forward to getting all of your hate mail. I know everybody loves cumulative flow diagrams. I would just, I would put them away, not for the reasons that you might think that I would put them away, but for all the reasons that Prateek just mentioned. That's why I would put them away. So for our hero in the background, Nisha, who has not stayed still in this episode.
I think this is the first time she's actually looked at the camera in this episode. Yeah.
She's been kind of all over the place. God, you guys talking about CFDs again. So for Nisha, for the Yogi Bear of Agile, Prateek Singh, my name is Daniel Vacanti. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next episode. Hi, everybody.